Miguel Street, Chapter 15. Until the soldiers came. Edward, Hat's brother, was a man of many parts, and I always thought it a sad thing that he drifted away from us. He used to help Hat with the cows when I first knew him, and like Hat, he looked settled and happy enough. He said he had given up women for good, and he concentrated on cricket, football, boxing, horse racing, and cockfighting. In this way, he was never bored, and he had no big ambition to make him unhappy. Like Hat, Edward had a high regard for beauty, but Edward didn't collect birds of beautiful plumage as Hat did. Edward painted. His favorite subject was a brown hand clasping a black one, and when Edward painted a brown hand, it was a brown hand. No nonsense about light and shades. And the sea was a blue sea, and mountains were green. Edward mounted his pictures himself and framed them in red passepartout. The big department stores, Salvatore's, Fogarty's, and Johnson's distributed Edward's work on commission. To the street, however, Edward was something of a menace. He would see Mrs. Morgan wearing a new dress and say, "Ah, Mrs. Morgan, is a nice dress you're wearing there, but I think I could do with it some sort of decoration." Or he would see Edwards wearing a new shirt and say, Edwards, you're wearing a new shirt, man. You write your name in it, you know. Otherwise somebody pick it up brisk one of these days. Tell you what, I go write it for you. He ruined many garments in this way. He also had the habit of giving away ties he had decorated himself. He would say, "I have something for you. Take it and wear it. I given it to you because I like you." And if the tie wasn't worn, Edward would get angry and begin shouting, "But you see how ungrateful black people is? Listen to this. I see this man not wearing a tie. I take a bus and I go to town. I walk to Johnson's and I look for the gents department. I meet a girl and I buy a tie. I take a bus back home. I go inside my room and take up my brush and unscrew my paint. I dip my brush in the paint and I put the brush on the tie. I spend 2-3 hours doing that, and after all this, the man ain't wearing my tie." But Edward did a lot more than just paint. One day, not many months after I had come to the street, Edward said, "Coming back on the bus from Cockerite last night, I only hearing the bus wheel cracking over Crab Back. You know the place by the coconut trees and the swamp? There it just crawling with crab. People say they even climbing up the coconut trees." Hat said, "They just come out a lot at full moon. Let we go tonight and catch some of the crabs that Edward see." Edward said, "It's just at what I was saying. We will have to take the boys because it have so much crab, even they could pick up a lot." So we boys were invited. Edward said, "Hat, I was thinking, it go be a lot easier to catch the crab if we take a shovel. It have so much you could just shovel them up." Hat said, "Alright, we go take the cow pen shovel." Edward said, "That's settled, but look, all you have strong shoes? You better get strong shoes, you know, because these crab and them ain't playing big, and if you don't look out, they start walking away with your big toe before you know what is what." Hat said, "I go use the leggings I does wear when I cleaning out the cow pen." Edward said, "And we better wear gloves. I know a man was catching crab one day, and suddenly he see his right hand walking away from him. He look again and see 4-5 crab carrying it away. This man jump up and begin one bawling. So we have to be careful. If you boys ain't have no gloves, just wrap some cloth round your hands. That go be alright." So late that night, we all climbed into the Cockerite bus, Hat in his leggings, Edward in his, and the rest of us carrying cutlasses and big brown sacks. The shovel Hat carried still stank from the cow pen, and people began squinching up their noses. Hat said, "Let them smell it. They just all want milk when the cow give it. People looked at the leggings and the cutlasses and the shovel and the sacks and looked away quickly. They stopped talking. The conductor didn't ask for our fares. The bus was silent until Edward began to talk. Edward said, "We must try and not use the cutlass. It ain't nice to kill. Try and get them live and put them in the bag." Many people got off at the next stop. By the time the bus got to the Mukurapu road, it was carrying only us. The conductor stood right at the front talking to the driver. Just before we got to Cockeright Terminus, Edward said, "Oh God, I knew I was forgetting something. We can't bring back all the crab in a bus. I have to go and telephone for a van." He got off one stop before the terminus. We walked a little way in the bright moonlight, left the road and climbed down the swamp. A tired wind blew from the sea, and the smell of the stale seawater was everywhere. Under the coconut trees it was dark. We walked a bit further in. A cloud covered the moon and the wind fell. Hat called out, "You boys are alright? Be careful with your foot. I don't want any of you going home with only 3 toes." Boy said, "But I ain't seen any crab." 10 minutes later, Edward joined us. He said, "How many bags you full?" Hat said, "It look like a lot of people had the same idea and come and take away all the crab." Edward said, "Rubbish. You don't see the moon ain't showing. We got to wait until the moon come out before the crab come out. Sit down, boys. Let we wait." The moon remained clouded for half an hour. Boy said, "It making cold and I want to go home. I don't think it have any crab." Errol said, "Don't mind boy. I know him. He just frightened of the dark and he afraid the crab bite him." At this point, we heard a rumbling in the distance. Hat said, "It look like the van come." Edward said, "It ain't a van really. I ordered a big truck from Sam." We sat in silence waiting for the moon to clear. Then about a dozen torchlights flashed all around us. Someone shouted, "We ain't want any trouble, but if any of you play the fool, you're going to get beat up bad." We saw what looked like a squad of policemen surrounding us. Boy began to cry. Edward said, "It have man beating their wife. It have people breaking into other people's house. Why you policemen don't go and spend your time doing something with sense, eh? Just fair change." A policeman said, "Why you don't shut up? You want me spit in your mouth." Another policeman said, "What you have in those bags?" Edward said, "Only crab, but take care, there's big crab and they go bite off your hand." Nobody looked inside the bags, and then a man with a lot of stripes said, "Everybody playing bad man these days. Everybody getting full of smart answers like the Americans and them." A policeman said, "They have bag, they have cutlass, they have shovel, they have glove." Hat said, "We was catching crab." The policeman said, "With shovel? What happened that you suddenly is God and make a new sort of crab that you catch with shovel?" It took a lot of talk to make the policeman believe our story. The officer in charge said, "I go like to lay my hands on the son of a bitch who telephoned and say he was going to kill somebody." Then the policeman left. It was late and we had missed the last bus. Hat said, "We had better wait for the truck Edward order." Edward said, "Something tell me that truck ain't coming now." Hat said very slowly, half laughing and half serious, "Edward, you is my own brother, but you know you really is a son of a bitch." Edward sat down and just laughed and laughed. Then the war came. Hitler invaded France and the Americans invaded Trinidad. Lord Invader made a hit with a certain calypso song. For the first time in Trinidad, there was work for everybody, and the Americans paid well. Edward stopped working in the cow pen and got a job with the Americans at Chaguaramas. Hat said, "Edward, I think you're foolish to do that. The Americans ain't here forever and ever. It ain't have no sense in going off and working for big money and then not having nothing to eat after 3-4 years." Edward said, "This war look as though I go last a long time. And the Americans not like the British, you know. They does make you work hard, but they does pay for it." Edward sold his share of the cows to Hat, and that marked the beginning of his drift away from us. Edward surrendered completely to the Americans. He began wearing clothes in the American style, he began chewing gum, and he tried to talk with an American accent. We didn't see much of him except on Sundays, and then he made us feel small and inferior. He grew fussy about his dress, and he began wearing a gold chain around his neck. He began wearing straps around his wrists after the fashion of tennis players. These straps were just becoming fashionable among smart young men in Port of Spain. Edward didn't give up painting, but he no longer offered to paint things for us, and I think most people were relieved. He entered some poster competition, and when his design didn't win even a consolation prize, he grew really angry with Trinidad. One Sunday, he said, "I was stupid to send in anything I paint with my own two hands for Trinidad people to judge. What they know about anything? No, if I was in America, it would have been different. The Americans is people. They know about things." To hear Edward talk, you felt that America was a gigantic country inhabited by giants. They lived in enormous houses and they drove in the biggest cars of the world. Edward used to say, "Look at Miguel Street. In America you think they have streets so narrow? In America this street could pass for a sidewalk." One night I walked on with Edward to Dockside, the American Army camp. Through the barbed wire you could see the huge screen of an open-air cinema. Edward said, "You see that sort of theater they come and build in a stupid little place like Trinidad? Imagine the sort of thing they have in the States." And we walked down a little further until we came to a sentry in the box. Edward used his best American accent and said, "What's cooking, Joe?" To my surprise, the sentry, looking fierce under his helmet, replied, and in no time at all, Edward and the sentry were talking away, each trying to use more swear words than the other. When Edward came back to Miguel Street, he began swaggering along, and he said to me, tell them how good I does get on with the Americans." And when he was with Hat, he said, "Was talking the other night with the American, damn good friend, and he was telling me that as soon as the Americans enter the war go end." Errol said, "It ain't that we want to win the war. As soon as they make Lord Anthony Eden Prime Minister, the war go end quick." Edward said, "Shut up, kid." But the biggest change of all was the way Edward began talking of women. Up till then, he used to say that he was finished with them for good. He made out that his heart had been broken a long time ago and he had made a vow. It was a vague and tragic story. But now on Sundays, Edward said, "You should see the sort of craft they have at the base. Nothing like these stupid Trinidad girls, you know. No partner. Girls with style. Girls with real class." I think it was Edders who said, "I shouldn't let it worry you. They wouldn't tangle with you, those girls. They want big American men. You safe." Edward called Edders a shrimp and walked away in a huff. He began lifting weights, and in this too, Edward was running right at the head of fashion. I don't know what happened in Trinidad about that time, but every young man became suddenly obsessed with the body beautiful ideal, and there were physique competitions practically every month. Hat used to console himself by saying, "Don't worry, it's just a lot of old flash, you hear? They say they building muscle. Just let them cool off and see what happen. All that thing they call muscle turn fat, you know. Edwards said, "It's the funniest sight you could see. At the dairies in Phillip Street, all you see in these days is a long line of black men sitting at the counter and drinking quart bottle of white milk. All of them wearing sleeveless jersey to show off their big arm." In about 3 months, Edward made his appearance among us in a sleeveless jersey. He had become a really big man. Presently, he began talking about the women at the base who were chasing him. He said, "I don't know what they see in me." Somebody had the idea of organizing a local talent on parade show, and Edward said, "Don't make me laugh. What sort of talent do you think Trinidad have?" The first show was a broadcast, and we all listened to it in Edwards' house. Edward kept on laughing all the time. Hat said, "Why you don't try singing yourself then?" Edward said, "Sing for who? Trinidad people?" Hat said, "Do them a favor." To everybody's surprise, Edward began singing, and the time came when Hat had to say, "I just can't live in the same house with Edward. I think he go have to move." Edward moved, but he didn't move very far. He remained on our side of Miguel Street. He said, "It's a good thing. I was getting tired of the cow smell." Edward went up for one of the local talent shows, and in spite of everything, we all hoped that he would win a prize of some sort. The show was sponsored by a biscuit company, and I think the winner got some money. "They just give the other a 31-cent pack of biscuit," Hat said. Edward got a package of biscuits. He didn't bring it home though. He threw it away. He said, "Throw it away? Why I shouldn't throw it away? You see, it's just what I does tell you. Trinidad people don't know good thing. They're just born stupid. Down at the base it have Americans begging me to sing. They know what is what. The other day, working and singing at the base, the colonel come up and tell me I had a nice voice. He was begging me to go to the States." Hat said, "Why you don't go then?" Edward said fiercely, "Give me time. Wait and see if I don't go." Edward said, "What about all those women and them who was chasing you? They catch up with you yet or they pass you?" Edward said, "Listen, Joe, I don't want to start getting tough with you. Do me a favor and shut up." When Edward brought any American friends to his house, he pretended that he didn't know us, and it was funny to see him walking with them, holding his arms in the American way, hanging loosely like a gorilla's. Hat said, "All the money he making, he's spending it on rum and ginger, curry favoring with them Americans." In a way, I suppose, we were all jealous of him. Hat began saying, "It ain't hard to get a work with the Americans. I just don't want to have a boss. That's all. I like being my own boss." Edward didn't mix much with us now. One day, he came to us with a sad face and said, "Hat, it look like as if I have to go get married." He spoke with his Trinidad accent. Hat looked worried. He said, Why you have to go get married?" He spoke with his Trinidad accent. "She making baby." Is a damn funny thing to say. If everybody married because woman making baby for them, it go be a hell of a thing. What happened that you want to be different now from everybody else in Trinidad? You come so American? Edward hitched up his tight American-style trousers and made a face like an American film actor. He said, "You know all the answers, don't you? This girl is different. Sure, I fall in love maybe once, maybe twice before, but this kid's different." Hat said, "She's got what it takes?" Edward said, "Yes." Hat said, "Edward, you is big man. It clear that you make up your mind to marry this girl. Why you come round trying to make me force you to marry her? You is big man. You ain't have to come to me to get permission to do this or that." When Edward left, Hat said, Whenever Edward come to me with a lie, he like a little boy. He can't lie to me. But if he married this girl, although I insist she, I feel he gonna live to regret it. Edward's wife was a tall and thin, white-skinned woman. She looked very pale and perpetually unwell. She moved as though every step cost her effort. Edward made a great fuss about her and never introduced us. The women of the street lost no time in passing judgment. Mrs. Morgan said, "She is a born troublemaker, that woman. I feel sorry for Edward. He get himself in one mess." Mrs. Baku said, "She's one of these modern girls. They want their husband to work all day and come home and cook and wash and clean up. All they know is to put powder and rouge on their face and walk out swinging their backside." And Hat said, "But how she making baby? I can't see anything." Edward dropped out of our circle completely. Hat said, "She giving him good hell." And one day, Hat shouted across the road to Edward, "Joe, come across here for a moment." Edward looked very surly. He asked in Trinidadian, "What you want?" Hat smiled and said, "What about the baby? When it coming?" Edward said, "What the hell you want to know that for?" Hat said, "I go be funny sort of uncle if I wasn't interested in my nephew." Edward said, "She ain't making no more baby." Edward said, "So it was just a line she was shooting then?" Hat said, "Edward, you're lying. You make up all that in the first place. She wasn't making no baby, and you know that. She didn't tell you she was making baby, and you know that too. If you want to marry the woman, why are you making all this thing about it?" Edward looked very sad. "If you want to know the truth, I don't think she could make baby." And when this news filtered through to the women of the street, they all said what my mother said. She said, "Oh, you could see pink and pale people ever make baby." And although we had no evidence, and although Edward's house was still noisy with Americans, we felt that all was not well with Edward and his wife. One Friday, just as it was getting dark, Edward ran up to me and said, "Put down that stupidness you're reading and go and get a policeman." I said, "Policeman? But how I go and get policeman just like that?" Edward said, "You could ride?" I said, "Yes." Edward said, "You have a bicycle lamp?" I said, "No." Edward said, "Take the bike and ride without lamp. You're bound to get policeman." I said, "And when I get this policeman, what I go tell him?" Edward said, "She tried to kill herself again." Before I had cycled to Ariapita Avenue, I had met not one but two policemen. One of them was a sergeant. He said, "You thinking of going far, eh?" I said, "Is you I was coming to find." The other policeman laughed. The sergeant said to him, "He's smarty. I feel the magistrate go like that excuse. It's a new one, and even me like it." I said, "Come quick, Edward wife try kill herself again." The sergeant said, "Oh, Edward wife always killing herself, eh?" And he laughed. He added, "And where this Edward wife try to kill herself again, eh?" I said, "Just a little bit down Miguel Street." The constable said, "He really smart now, you know." The sergeant said, "Yes, we'll leave him here and go find somebody who try kill herself. Cut out this nonsense, boy. Where your bicycle license?" I said, "It's true what I'm telling you. I go come back with you and show you the house." Edward was waiting for us. He said, "You take a damn long time getting these just two policemen." The policemen went inside the house with Edward, and a little crowd gathered on the pavement. Mrs. Baku said, "It's just what I expect. I know from the first it was going to end up like this." Mrs. Morgan said, Life is a funny thing. I wish I was like she and couldn't make baby. And it have a woman now trying to kill herself because she can't make baby. Edders said, "Oh, you know is that she try kill herself for?" Mrs. Morgan shook a fat shoulder. "What else?" From then on, I began to feel sorry for Edward because the men in the street and the women didn't give him a chance. And no matter how many big parties Edward gave at his house for Americans, I could see that he was affected when Edward shouted, "Why you don't take your wife to America, boy? Those American doctors smart like hell, you know. They could do anything." Or when Mrs. Baku suggested that she should have a blood test at the Caribbean Medical Commission at the end of Ariapita Avenue. The parties at Edward's house grew wilder and more extravagant. Had said, "Every party does have an end and people have to go home. Edward only making himself more and more miserable." The parties certainly were not making Edward's wife any happier. She still looked frail and cantankerous, and now we sometimes heard Edward's voice raised in argument with her. It was not the usual sort of man and wife argument we had in the street. Edward sounded exasperated, but anxious to please. Edders said, "I wish any woman I married try behaving like that. Man, I give she one good beating, and I make she straight like bamboo." Had said, "Edward asks for what he get, and the stupid thing is that I believe Edward really loved the woman." Edward would talk to Hat and Edders and the other big men when they spoke to him, but when the boys tried talking to him, he had no patience. He would threaten to beat us, and so we left him alone. But whenever Edward passed, Boy, brave and stupid as ever, would say in an American accent, "What's up, Joe?" Edward would stop and look angrily at Boy, and then lunge at him, shouting and swearing. He used to say, "You see the sort of way Trinidad children does behave? What else this boy want but a good cut ass?" One day, Edward caught Boy and began flogging him. At every stroke, Boy shouted, "No, Edward!" And Edward got madder and madder. Then Hat ran up and said, "Edward, put on that boy this minute or else it have big trouble in the street. Put him down, I tell you. I ain't afraid of your big arms, you know." The men in the street had to break up the fight, and when Boy was freed, he shouted to Edward, "Why you don't make trial yourself and then beat it?" Hat said, "Boy, I going to cut your tail this minute. Errol, go break a good whip for me." It was Edward himself who broke the news. He said, "She leave me." He spoke in a very casual way. Edders said, "I sorry, too bad, Edward." Hat said, "Edward boy, the things that not to be don't be." Edward didn't seem to be paying too much attention, so Edders went on. "I didn't like she from the first, and I don't think a man should marry a woman who can't make baby." Edward said, "Edders, shut it in little mouth up. And you too, Hat, giving me all this make-up sympathy." Hat said, "But who laughing?" "Look, Edward, go and give anybody else all this temper you hear, but leave me out. After all, it ain't nothing strange for a man wife to run away. It ain't your fault, it's the Americans' fault." Edward said, "You know who she run away with?" Edward said, "You hear me say she run away with anybody?" Edward said, "No, you didn't say that, but it's what I feel." Edward said sadly, "Yes, she run away with an American soldier, and I give the man so much of my rum to drink." But after a few days, Edward was running around telling people what had happened and saying, "It's a damn good thing. I don't want a wife that can't make baby." And now nobody made fun of Edward's Americanism, and I think we were all ready to welcome him back to us. but he wasn't really interested. We hardly saw him in the street. When he wasn't working, he was out on some excursion. Hat said, "Is Lovey really love she? He looking for she." In the Calypso by Lord Invader, the singer loses his wife to the Americans, and when he begs her to come back to him, she says, "Invader, I changed my mind. I living with my Yankee soldier." This was exactly what happened to Edward. He came back in a great temper. He was miserable. He said, "I live in Trinidad." Edda said, "Where you going? America?" Edward almost cuffed Eddowes. Hat said, "But how you want to let one woman break up your life so? You behaving as if you's the first man this thing happened to." But Edward didn't listen. At the end of the month, he sold his house and left Trinidad. I think he went to Aruba or Curacao, working with the big Dutch oil company. And some months later, Hat said, "You know what I hear? Edward wife have a baby for she American." End of chapter 15.